Have you ever noticed that if you want to make a best friend instantly, you really shouldn't talk about what you love?
Oh, absolutely not. No.
Right. You actually just need to find out what you both hate. I mean, it is the ultimate social glue.
It really is.
Like you're at a party, you're making that agonizingly awkward small talk, and suddenly you realize you both, cannot stand the exact same coworker. Or maybe it's the same dazzling fashion trend.
Or that one celebrity everyone else seems to love.
Exactly. And the ice doesn't just break, it completely shatters. You are suddenly like comrades in arms.
Yeah.
But, it makes you wonder why our biology rewards us so heavily for toxicity. Like, why do our social media platforms seem to run almost entirely on this combustible fuel of outrage?
Well, it's because, in the short term at least, shared grievances mimic the feeling of true connection. I mean, we are fundamentally tribal creatures, right?
Yeah.
And nothing defines the boundaries of a tribe faster than identifying a common enemy. But the catch is, it's a very fragile, incredibly destructive imitation of actual intimacy.
Which is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at the work of Alpesh Shah, whose writing completely deconstructs the psychology, the biology, and the social mechanics behind why we hate.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating collection of sources.
It is. We're going to look at why it's so seductively appealing to us. And then, crucially, we're going to look at the cure.
And we really do need to emphasize that cure part, because the goal of this deep dive isn't to just sit around and admire the problem.
Right.
We are going to explore a really profound philosophical and spiritual antidote. We'll be journeying from the sort of psychological perks of holding a grudge to this really stark contrast between Western existentialism, specifically Jean-Paul Sartre, and the ancient Eastern wisdom found in Vedic texts.
Yeah, but to understand the cure, we obviously have to look at the disease first. And reading through these notes, the best analogy I could come up with for this shared social hatred is that it functions basically as junk food for the soul.
Oh, I like that. Junk food for the soul.
Right. Because it feels deeply satisfying in the moment. It hits all those immediate primal reward centers in your brain. You get this massive spike of dopamine when someone validates your anger.
Exactly.
But if that is the primary emotion you consume, it's just slowly degrading your health from the inside out.
And the really terrifying danger of that junk food diet is that it's being weaponized on a massive scale today. I mean, just look at the architecture of our digital spaces.
Oh, for sure.
A post expressing pure, unadulterated hatred towards, say, a public figure or a group that gathers crowds exponentially faster than a post expressing nuanced appreciation.
Yeah, nuance doesn't go viral.
It doesn't. The likes just pour in, the algorithm amplifies it, and people flock to that negativity because it demands absolutely zero emotional vulnerability from them, all right?
Right.
But it still provides that instant rush of belonging.
But the biological reality of this, when you actually look at what happens in the body, is terrifying. The sources point out that the negative vibrations of hate, even if it's, a completely silent, secret hatred that you never voice aloud.
Which is so common.
Yeah, it has a measurable physical impact on our health. We're talking about cortisol spikes. Your nervous system literally gets locked into this chronic fight or flight response. Your blood pressure rises.
You're just bathing your brain in stress hormones.
Exactly. By holding on to bitterness towards someone else, you are quite literally poisoning your own biology.
Which is why the texts draw a really crucial distinction here, and I think we need to highlight this. It's the difference between the action and the actor.
Okay, break that down a bit.
So, hating a specific action is a completely natural evolutionary response. Like, if someone commits violence or acts with severe cruelty, feeling anger or disgust toward that behavior makes logical sense, right?
Yeah, of course. It protects society.
Exactly. It's a protective mechanism. But the real destructive trap, the thing that locks us into that chronic stress state you just mentioned, is when we transition from hating the action to permanently labeling the person themselves as fundamentally bad.
And that distinction really shifted my perspective, actually.
Yeah.
Because if you label the entire person, you're essentially fixing them in time and space as, like, a cartoon villain.
Right.
You freeze them in their absolute worst moment.
And in doing so, you essentially murder their potential to ever become anything else. The sources illustrate this beautifully with a quote from the mystic poet Kabir.
Oh, I love this quote.
It's so good. He basically said, "I went looking for the bad, found none. I looked in my own heart, none worse than me."
Wow.
Yeah. And the underlying logic there is that human beings are fluid. We are capable of immense change. So no single individual is entirely irredeemably worthy of permanent hatred.
I mean, just think about the story of Valmiki from the sources.
Oh, that's the perfect example.
Right. So for anyone unfamiliar, Valmiki is revered today as one of the greatest ancient sages. He's the author of the epic Ramayana, but his origin story is completely different.
Completely different.
He started out as this notorious, incredibly cruel highway robber. He was a literal menace to society.
Yeah.
Now, just imagine if the society of his time had simply applied a permanent, immovable label to him. If they had just said, "You are a robber, you are evil, and that is the entirety of your existence," and offered zero path for redemption.
That robber would never have had the psychological space to transform into the sage.
Exactly.
By eliminating the possibility of growth for someone else, we're actually just demonstrating the limitations of our own mindset. I mean, we are all fundamentally capable of generating positive thought. So to look at another human being and feel only pure static hatred, it means the failure is actually occurring within our own psychological environment.
Okay, so if it's so damaging to our bodies and if it blinds us to human potential, why is it basically the default setting for so much of the population?
Well, the sources really dig into the mechanics of this. They break it down into four main pillars, really.
Right, let's go through those.
Starting with the sheer primal fear of the unfamiliar. It's that simple, deeply flawed equation that different equals bad.
Yeah, we see this constantly, especially in people who live very rigid, heavily routinized lives. They get locked into a specific set of cultural customs or personal habits, and they just rarely step outside that bubble.
Right. And when they do encounter someone who, say, eats differently, dresses differently, or worships differently, their brain doesn't register that difference as a curiosity.
No, it registers it as a direct threat.
Exactly. A threat to their entire reality.
Because it forces them to ask a really terrifying question. If their way of living is okay, does that mean my way isn't the only right way? And people will do almost anything, anything, to avoid questioning their own worldview, so they just reflexively reject the unfamiliar person.
And that fear metastasizes into something much more dangerous when it gets combined with personal frustration. Which brings us to the second pillar, the concept of the scapegoat.
Oh, the scapegoat, yeah.
Frustrated individuals use hatred to soothe their own failures. If you're struggling immensely in your career, or maybe your personal life feels like it's falling apart, looking in the mirror and actually addressing those structural internal issues, that's painful.
It takes massive effort.
Huge effort. So psychologically, it is just so much easier to find an external target to blame for your misery.
And that scapegoating dynamic doesn't just happen with individuals either. The texts highlight how entire nations utilize this exact same psychological loophole.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a really profound difference outlined here between patriotism and nationalism. Because true patriotism is simply a deep love for one's own country, right? It's a desire to see it flourish.
Yeah, it's internally focused.
But nationalism often relies entirely on the hatred of other nations to manufacture a sense of internal unity.
It creates an artificial cohesion, like leaders who are failing to provide for their citizens internally, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum, by the way. They will often just point across the border and say, look, there's the real reason you are suffering.
It's a magic trick. It masks internal failures by redirecting the population's anger outward.
Exactly.
But what about when it's not nations avoiding blame? What happens when an individual has no specific blame to shift, but just this overwhelming sense of emptiness?
That brings us to the third pillar.
Right. I was really struck by the connection the sources made here between the modern loneliness epidemic and the rise of hate groups, because it made me wonder, is joining a radical group actually just a tragic shortcut to feeling significant?
It absolutely is. I mean, that is the core driver of modern extremism. Lonely individuals, people who feel completely disconnected, invisible, or just left behind by the pace of modern society, they are desperate for an identity.
Yeah.
And when they stumble into a hate group, suddenly they are handed a prepackaged purpose. They feel like a crucial, active part of this grand societal narrative.
And I think the most seductive part is that it requires absolutely zero constructive work. You don't have to volunteer at a soup kitchen. You don't have to mentor a child. You don't even have to put in the incredibly hard, emotionally vulnerable work of going out into the real world and making a real friend.
Right, you just have to log on to a forum.
Exactly. Find the designated target, broadcast negativity, and boom, you belong.
And you are immediately rewarded with this echo chamber of voices telling you how smart and righteous you are. You feel powerful simply by tearing someone else down.
which perfectly explains the metaphor used for the fourth pillar,
Yeah.
the inferiority complex. The notes describe it as trying to make someone else's line shorter.
Such a great visual.
It really is. Picture two lines drawn in chalk on a blackboard. Yours is very short, and someone else's is very long. Now, the healthy, difficult response is to do the work to draw your line longer.
To learn a new skill, to improve your character, to grow.
Right. But instead, people driven by a sense of lack, they just take an eraser and wipe away half of the other person's line.
It's a coping mechanism for profound inadequacy. When someone feels a deep lack and they're forced to witness someone else's capability or success, they resort to extremes. Sometimes they might obsessively praise that person to try and, bask in their reflected glory.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
But more often, they result to character assassination. They try to cut the capable person down to size so they don't have to face the agonizing reality of their own shortcomings.
The tragedy of all this isn't just that it ruins the individual's life in the present moment, though. It's the generational toll it takes.
Right, because hatred is inherited.
It is. It's a blueprint that gets passed down from parent to child. The sources note this really chilling reality. Youth who are raised watching their elders harbor deep, vitriolic hatred for their ancestors or for neighboring groups, they are quietly taking notes on how to interact with the world.
They're absorbing it all. And the bitter irony is that those same young people, having been taught that hatred is a completely valid tool for conflict resolution, they will eventually apply that very same blueprint to the elders who taught it to them. Wow.
Yeah. Hatred behaves exactly like a fire. It doesn't discriminate about what it burns. Eventually, it consumes the house of the person who lit the match.
And along the way, we lose our rationality completely. I mean, think about how many people have entirely destroyed decades-long friendships over a bitter political argument.
Too many.
They just exhaust their physical and mental health trying to defend an ideology against someone who is just honestly baiting them.
This is exactly why the material strongly advises the practice of simply ignoring toxic provocations.
Right?
You have absolutely no obligation to sacrifice your nervous system trying to dismantle every foolish or prejudiced argument you encounter. Engaging often just pulls you down into the mud with them.
Okay, so this all brings us to a really fascinating cultural touchstone mentioned in the research. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre and his famous play, No Exit.
Yes.
This is the play that gave us the iconic phrase, "Hell is other people." It's a phrase that resonates instantly, doesn't it? Especially when you've just spent, an hour in terrible traffic or survived a brutal family holiday.
Oh, totally.
But the context of the play is key here. Sartre traps 3 deceased characters in a single room for eternity.
And there are no demons.
No demons, no pitchforks, no fire. The torture is entirely psychological. It's inflicted by the characters upon each other through their constant judgments, their demands, and their relentless, toxic scrutiny.
Sartre's point, as he later clarified, was that if our relationships are twisted, if our dynamics with others are toxic, then the mere presence of other people becomes a living hell because we are trapped in how they perceive us.
Right.
But the sources push this concept even further. Shaw argues that the very act of viewing anyone fundamentally as the other is what actively constructs that hell around us.
The moment you draw a hard boundary between me and them, the moment you categorize another human being as completely separate, alien, and, devoid of your own internal complexities, you have just laid the bricks for your own personal torture chamber. You guarantee a life of friction.
So Sartre basically traps us in this hell of other people.
Yeah.
But the Eastern texts actually offer a trapdoor out of that room.
They do.
If Western existentialism says hell is other people, the ancient Eastern wisdom of Advaita philosophy steps in and asks a pretty radical question. What if there are no other people?
Yeah, this is the massive paradigm shift we talked about. Advaita philosophy is centered entirely on non-dualism. The core tenet is simply, there is no other.
It completely dismantles the very foundation of Sartre's dilemma by challenging the illusion of separation entirely.
Exactly. And to understand this, we look at the Vedic texts, specifically verse 6 of the Isha Upanishad.
Right. And that verse states that whoever sees all beings within themselves and sees themselves within all beings does not hate anyone.
Exactly. Because how could you?
Okay, wait. I struggle with this a bit.
Yeah.
I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening, because conceptually, it sounds incredibly beautiful.
Sure.
But practically, if, say, a corrupt politician is actively destroying a community,
Yeah.
or a criminal is actively harming people, isn't telling society just see yourself in them and don't hate them dangerously passive.
That's the reflex, yeah.
Doesn't feel like weakness to just roll over and refuse to be angry.
It's the most common and natural objection to this philosophy. But the texts provide a really brilliant counter-argument, and it focuses on the Sanskrit term na vijugumsat, which translates roughly to the absence of disgust, or not hating.
Okay.
The philosophy argues that na vijugumsat is not a weakness at all. It is actually our eternal, uncorrupted identity. Think about it in terms of power dynamics. When you actively hate someone, you are handing them the keys to your emotional state.
You're letting them live rent-free in your head.
Yes.
You're giving them this immense, totally unearned importance over your daily life.
Exactly. Hating a corrupt politician doesn't actually stop their corruption. It only degrades your own spiritual and mental baseline.
Right.
True strength, the sources argue, is the ability to fiercely oppose a harmful action, to fight for justice with everything you have, but to do so with a heart that is entirely scrubbed clean of personal hatred. True spiritual practice doesn't even begin until that toxic disgust is washed away.
And this ties directly into the concept of tat tvamasi, correct?
Yes, tat tvamasi, which basically translates to thou art that. It is this profound realization that the consciousness, the fundamental life force, the spark of awareness that resides inside your physical body is the exact same consciousness animating everyone else.
It's a shared universal essence.
Exactly.
So if you strip away the temporary ego, the job titles, the political affiliations, the transient identities, if there is fundamentally no other, then who are you actually hating? You're essentially despising a different manifestation of your own self.
The challenge, of course, is that knowing this intellectually and actually living it are two very, very different things.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Which is why I love the modern analogy used in the text to explain this ancient wisdom. The sources compare the repetition of this truth, the way these concepts are repeated over and over in texts like the Gita and the Upanishads, to iterations in computer programming.
It makes perfect sense. If you write a new line of code, you don't just stare at it once and expect the entire operating system of your computer to permanently change, right?
Right.
You have to run the program. You have to execute the iteration over and over again until the system adapts.
And our brains are basically running on buggy, outdated software. I mean, our default setting is tribalism, fear, and division.
Yeah, that's the junk food diet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to consciously loop this new code. There is no other. There is no other.
Right.
You run the iteration when someone cuts you off in traffic. You run it when you read a political post that makes your blood boil.
Yes.
You run it standing in the grocery store line.
Yeah.
You have to actively train your brain to break its addiction to the junk food of hatred.
It really reframes spiritual philosophy from this sort of passive state of just being peaceful to an incredibly active, strenuous daily practice. You are fundamentally changing the lens through which you process every single human interaction.
So how do we take this massive abstract concept of no other and actually apply it when we wake up tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
I want to wrap up with what I think is the most elegant practical metaphor from the entire deep dive. It's the concept of Premnu Parakar, which translates to the compass of love.
Oh, this is beautiful. Imagine a standard geometric compass, right? The little metal tool you used in middle school math class to draw circles.
Yeah.
If you keep the hinge on that compass pinched very tight, the setting is narrow, and you draw a tiny, restrictive circle.
And inside that tiny circle, you only have room to fit people who look exactly like you, think exactly like you, and vote exactly like you.
Exactly.
And because the circle is so small, almost the entire world is left outside of it. And that's when the labeling starts. You stand inside your tiny circle and say, I am a rational thinker, and everyone outside is a fool. Or, I am of this faith, and they are lost.
Right.
You divide humanity by caste, by gender, by income, and you just spend your life throwing rocks at everyone standing outside your tiny geometry.
But the practice of love, and not as an emotion, but as an applied spiritual discipline, is the deliberate act of loosening that hinge and widening the compass. You open it a little further, and you draw a larger circle. Suddenly, you find that people who disagree with your politics can actually fit inside it.
Then you open it a little further, and people from entirely different cultures and backgrounds fit inside it.
You just keep stretching the hinge, widening the radius, until eventually the circle is so massive that humanity as a whole fits inside it. You expand your definition of us until the concept of them completely disappears.
Which brings us right back to the trapdoor out of Sartre's room. There is no other.
There is only us.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today as you go about your week. We started this deep dive talking about how effortless it is to bond over a shared dislike, how easily we gorge on that junk food for the soul. But if the feeling of hatred is essentially just a mechanism that grants someone false importance and control over your nervous system, who are you currently allowing to dictate your emotional state? Who is living rent-free in your head right now? Tomorrow, when you feel that familiar, seductive spike of annoyance or outrage, try to catch yourself in the very act of reaching for the eraser to make someone else's line shorter. Stop, take a breath, and ask yourself, what happens to your world if, instead of erasing, you just widen the compass instead?